Hello and welcome to the DFW Divorce Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Eitzen, bringing you all the information you never knew you needed to know about family law. My guest today, again, is one of the name partners here at Duffy and Eitzen, my mother, Melinda Eitzen. How you doing, Mom?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, can't complain. Getting along as well as one could possibly hope. So the topic for our episode today is modifications. And I suppose the obvious first question to ask is, what exactly is a modification?
So when people get divorced, or if they were never married and they end up with an order, they were never married, but let's say they had a child together and they split up and they ended up with an order. So it could be an order called a suit affecting the parent-child relationship order or a divorce decree that lays out their parenting time, who has the child when, it lays out who gets to make certain decisions for the child, and how much child support will be and who pays the child support. Those three things can all be modified or changed until the child is 18. So either side could file suit with the court and ask to modify that order.
And can they do this at any time, or are there any restrictions on, when someone can file for a modification or how someone can file for a modification?
That's a good question. So from the date of that original order forward, they technically could ask at any time. They will be more welcomed back if at least a year has passed from the final order. Judges and courts don't want to redo these orders over and over for no reason. So they need to see that there's a reason to change it. And if you just entered that prior order, you probably don't have a new reason yet.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you would if you had an emergency. Like you entered the order and then the other person got arrested and they've gone to prison, or something. I mean, something dramatic. Then if it's within a year, that would make sense.
Mm-hmm. Now, do modifications only apply in instances where the co-parents cannot agree on a change? It's my understanding that.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly right. So they can do anything by agreement. We hope that parents will work together and not have to strictly go by their order. And we tell people, we hope you just throw your order in a drawer and you just work it out. And if you're, let's say that the mom's relatives are in town and it's not her weekend, but hopefully she can reach out to dad and say, hey, let's swap weekends because my relatives are in town and they want to see the kids. That's how we hope people will behave. But if they do that, they don't have to repaper that. If they want to make a permanent change and they do agree and they want it in paper form, they could do an agreed modification that is papered, where they file an agreed motion and an agreed new order and the judge signs it.
But that's mostly an administrative process because it is agreed. They're just submitting it and it just gets signed.
That's exactly right.
Wonderful. Then in the cases where you would need a more litigious modification, what I believe you said earlier that it needs to be a material and a substantial change to justify a modification?
Yeah, so the law says when you go back to modify, you have to show two things. You have to show that there's been a material and substantial change and that the change you're asking for is in the best interest of the child. And whoever's asking for the change is their burden of proof, or they're the ones who have to show the court that there has been a material and substantial change and that it would be in the child's best interest.
So what are some examples of something that would qualify as a material and substantial change? And what are some examples of some things that would not qualify as a material and substantial change?
Great question. So let's start out with one that would not qualify. If something was anticipated to happen and that is evident by the prior order. So as an example, someone's moving, but that's talked about in the prior order, and the prior order says when they move, then this will be the rule and the situation. Then that move could not be used as a material and substantial change in the future because it was already anticipated, and that's clear. But examples that would be a material and substantial change could be one, just that 7 years have passed and we're not dealing with a 2-year-old anymore. We're dealing with a 9-year-old. That could be alone. That could be enough. And the judge gets to decide if it's material and substantial change, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that could be just enough time passing. People moving could be. It has to all logically connect to what's going on with the kiddo. So as an example, if you moved but it didn't create a greater distance, it was an improvement, and you couldn't then say, well, now I need to change the order because he moved. Well, if his move was an improvement, that doesn't get you there. So you have to logic through why that change means there needs to be a change in the possession schedule or the decision making or the child support. For child support, it's job change, where the income is going to be different, or not a job change, but the income has just increased or decreased, or job loss. That's the biggest reason people go into change, is they've lost their job. How are they going to pay their child support? So that's definitely a reason for a change. And then back to the time with the kiddo, which is a big reason people file modifications. Another reason could be that something's going on with the child. So the child's having some type of problem and we're blaming what's going on at the other household, perhaps. So we need to change the schedule. Or one of the parents has become not good, like they're using drugs or they're robbing stores, or, you know, something dramatic has happened where that parent is no longer capable of parenting, or at least right now is not capable of parenting. So we need to go in and say, Judge, they really can't parent right now, so they shouldn't have the time, or they need to be supervised during that time, or we need to modify it in some way.
Got it. And then what about instances, it's saying that if there's been a change in the parent's behavior, made me think of this. What about in instances where the change being made is not necessarily being motivated by a parental decision, but because the child wants to change their primary residence? They're primarily living with mom, and they want to change to primarily living with dad, or vice versa. How does that factor into it? How does sort of the child's wants factor into the court's consideration?
Okay, that's a great question, and there is relevance to the child's desire, but it's a very misunderstood area. So I'll explain it. So once the child is 12 or older, what the child wants as to where the child lives primarily is relevant. Meaning, am I going to sleep more nights at my mom's house or more nights at my dad's house? And if that's what the fight is about, either side can ask the court to interview the child and hear the child's wishes about that. Now, that doesn't end it. That's one piece of the puzzle, right? I mean, you can't say, hey, 16-year-old, I'm going to buy you a new Corvette if you say you want to live with me, and the child says it, and that's it. And really, that parent's a drug dealer. So, right, that is not,
Right.
the court's going to look at the entirety of the situation, but that is one factor. Now, where the big misunderstanding is, and I get this call all the time, is people think at a certain age the child can decide if on a given day they want to go see mom or dad or not. Meaning, I'm supposed to go see mom or dad this Friday, but I'm old enough to decide. That is never true. Children are never given that option. So if they don't go when they're supposed to go, the other parent, the parent withholding, it looks like they're withholding, right, can go to jail. That could be the result. So people need to treat their orders just like they would treat school. Do you make your child go to school? Yes. Is there any big, long conversation with your child about it? No. You tell your child they're going to school. Well, same with seeing their other parent. You tell their child they're going to see their other parent. So what they need to do is either modify and ask the court to change it, but we're not going to ever give the child the power to every week say if they're going or not. And then you need to find a way for it to be a more enjoyable experience for your child. And that could be sending things with your child for them to do over there. It could be helping the child to negotiate with the other parent, getting to have friends over or do things that would make them enjoy that time better. And if it's because they're not getting along with that parent, maybe even getting family counseling going so that you can help improve that situation.
Okay, very good. An excellent answer. And so moving forward, the other part of the court's equation that you talked about is that any modification needs to be in the best interest of the child. How does the court go about assessing that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's such a big, broad statement, right? And
Mm-hmm.
what we hear all the time is both parents are saying, oh, it's in the best interest of Susie Q or Joey to do X or Y. So that's difficult. And it's just the court's viewpoint of it. And they're really focused on a modification from what is best for the child and not what's best for the parents. So sometimes parents come into this and they say, well, it's only fair that I should get blah, blah, blah. The court doesn't care what's fair to the parents. They only care what's best for the child. So if the child's doing great under the current order, you're going to have a harder time changing your order just because maybe the parent's more available and they just like to see their child more. That's not the measuring stick. The measuring stick is really what would work out best for this kiddo. And one thing that parents need to understand if they're considering a modification is they need to be exercising every hour they have available under the current order. A judge is not going to give you more time when you're not even exercising the time allowed. And people don't always get that. So that's a way to get more time, just exercise the time you're allowed under the current order.
Mm-hmm.
And ways that we can resolve modifications besides the judge deciding things is they can be handled collaboratively. And collaborative is a non-court, more amicable process, and it's excellent. And then another way is whether once we're in collaborative or litigation is to go to mediation and resolve it, try to resolve it in mediation. And I'm a mediator as well as a lawyer that represents parties. And mediation is a great way to help people resolve their issues and be heard about their concerns, and something that both parties can live with. And we have a little bit more creativity than what the courts are allowed in mediation or collaboration.
Well, there we go. Well, I don't have any other questions about modifications. Do you have anything that we didn't get to or that you want to sort of tie in here at the end?
I think people, if they're considering it or they think they might want to change, they should be aware that it will be helpful for us to have a calendar of the time that they have exercised, especially if they've been able to get extra time prior to leading up to the modification. They should be aware that it's legal in Texas to tape record a conversation as long as both parties, as long as they're a party to the conversation. So they should be aware that their spouse or their ex-spouse in this instance, or their ex girlfriend or boyfriend could be tape recording them, and that's legal as long as that person's part of the conversation, and that can be played in court. So sometimes if somebody sees a modification coming or if they want one, they will set you up to say horrible things and tape it because nobody can make us madder than our ex-spouse maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So they just need to be cautious and know that that is allowed. They are allowed to make that tape, and just don't say things they'll regret.
That's very good advice, I think, both in this specific instance and generally.
Pretend like an investigator's taking your picture and tape recording you. And if you live your life that way, it's a pretty good life.
Indeed. Well, I think that's all we've got then on this episode. Thank you so much for being a guest again, Mom.
Oh, it was great. Thank you.
Of course, of course. And thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and you want to know more, please check us out on the web at duffyandeitzen.com, or just type Duffy and Eitzen into Google. That's Duffee and Eitzen, Eitzen. You can also give us a call at 214-416-9010. Thank you so much again for listening. This has been the DFW Divorce Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Eitzen.
I'm Melinda Eitzen.
And thank you all so much for listening. Y'all stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye, y'all.